Hi and welcome and thank you for being here with us. You do know you're in the Digital Eclipse panel, right? Like you're here on purpose. This isn't. Yeah. It's okay. You can storm out angrily now, and we won't be offended if it's just a mistake. And even if you're just here because your legs are tired, thank you. We'll try to make it an entertaining hour for you. We are a small independent developer out of Emeryville, California. Digital Eclipse was established in 1992. We are actually proud to be the very first commercial emulation of an arcade game. Those of you who go way, way back may remember Macintosh versions of Defender, Joust, and Robotron. We did those. They shipped in long boxes that looked like the arcade machines. And from that, we have been around ever since in one form or another, doing a mix of classic game collections or smaller, we did a lot of Game Boy Advance titles there in the 90s and 2000s. And recently we've refocused the company in just the last few years to be very focused on, we don't like the word retro, honestly. It's more of giving classic games the respect they deserve. And that's something you're gonna hear a lot, I think, as we do this. But this is an actual photo of our actual office in actual Emeryville. I love the fact that we work out of a secret lair. We recently got a new building and we moved in, and it used to be a yoga and wellness studio. And I made a little sign, of our logo, and I was like, that way the mail people, the delivery folks know that they're in the right place. And our studio head, Mike Micah, who some of you may know as the Donkey Kong dad, among many other projects that he's done, Mike said, oh, no, take that out of the window. I don't want anybody to know we're here. And I think part of it was just his desire to be a supervillain and have a lair. But I think the other part was because we have a beautiful 35-game vintage arcade in the space where they used to do yoga. So he's like, yeah, let's not really advertise that we're here. So people drive up, for an interview on camera or to visit the studio, and they're like, am I in the right place? If you look like you're in the wrong place, you're in the right place. So if you're ever in Emeryville, go see Pixar. Don't see us. You won't find us anyway. This is our staff. We're actually...
I joke that the office really is my wellness center.
Yeah, that's the other hilarious part, is the least fit people in game development. Now we're in like a fitness center? Are you kidding me? They'll never find us. They'll never, so this is actually Mike Micah's office, and there's no better place in our office to have a team photo. So we crammed our team in there. Our core team is maybe 25, 30 people, Justin?
That's about right.
Yeah. We use a lot of contractors as well. We need external help for art and some programming, things like that. But this was a challenge for our photographer, Avery, and your speakers today are these three arrows. On the left there is, on the left there, and on the right there is Chris Kohler, and this is Justin Bailey. And so Chris is our editorial director. Do you want to introduce yourself? You want to risk me introducing you?
You do it.
All right, so Chris has an esteemed career in journalism. He has written several books. He's the author of Power Up, which is, how would you describe that? It's not the history of Nintendo, but it's Nintendo's influence on the world.
It was the first book in English to be written specifically about the subject of Japanese video games, like trying to figure out why Japanese video games were so popular worldwide. It was from 2004, so.
Right, yeah. But since then, you may know his work from Wired magazine, you may know him from Kotaku, and Boss Fight Books, Final Fantasy V, as well. And he's got a booth, so feel free to come by and buy his old crap. Justin comes from a very different realm, but has the same passions. You're our chief strategic officer, but also our head of publishing. So he's the guy that's getting us the deals in part. He's the person that's helping sweat not only our funding, but also some of our partnerships. He'll have a lot to talk about when we get to Wizardry, as you might know, if you know any of the background of that. But in addition to our strategy, you're an Apple II gamer and an RPG gamer from way back, and that's his Apple IIe on our table playing Wizardry. So if you haven't seen, he's why you can't touch it, because he doesn't want you to break the keyboard. Justin, is there anything else that I've left out?
No, pretty good.
Oh, all right.
Justin's also a big hit with the ladies, as you might imagine. Pretty much as soon as he says his name, they immediately take off their various suit.
That's right, yeah. I assume you're wearing a pink unitard under there, but no?
We'll find out.
I love that your name is legitimately Justin Bailey, because when we introduce him, sometimes people are like, not really though, right? So if you know Metroid lore, it all makes sense. My name's Dan Amrich. I just joined the company about 18 months ago, and they hired me because I talk very fast. I was in the games media for about 15 years. I was Dan Electro from GamePro magazine, if anybody remembers the cartoon characters. Wow, 4 Dan Electro fans, that's a new high, thank you. After that, I moved into community and talking directly with players on behalf of companies like Activision and Ubisoft. I'm thrilled to be here actually generating content for the games. And I also wrote a couple of books, one of which is PlayStation 2 for Dummies, which is not so much, I guess it's very forgettable. It's not unforgettable. It's not priceless, it's valueless, is how I usually think about it. So what we do now, in the last few years, Justin has helped reorganize the company, really. And we got a fresh round of funding, and we really refocused Digital Eclipse specifically on classic gaming. We have traditionally been part of a larger company called Other Ocean Interactive. You may know them from Project Winter. I'm not sure some of their other current projects. They just announced another one. But it became clear that like we needed a focus on the classic stuff while they went on and created original IP. So that's what we've been doing. You may have never heard of us, but you've probably seen some of the stuff we worked on. Our team did work on the Mega Man Legacy Collection, right? Is that what it was called, or was the Mega Man?
Mega Man Legacy Collection was the first game released by the revived Digital Eclipse brand in 2015. Street Fighter 30th.
Yes, 30th anniversary. SNK 40th anniversary.
Samurai Showdown
Collection. Disney Afternoon Collection on everything but Switch. We know. Stop. Disney Classics, which was Jungle Book, Aladdin, and Lion King. The 16-bit version's a definitive version of that.
Blizzard Arcade Collection was my first game.
Rock and Roll Racing, now with 4 players and in 16:9. Thank you, Mike Micah, for slinging the source code.
Don't sleep on Blizzard Arcade Collection if you haven't. It's really great.
Yeah, we're very proud of that. And Space Jam for Xbox,
Space Jam,
a free
New
download.
Legacy, the video game,
Yeah, which was a hell of a challenge because those maniacs said, you fans, you come up with a game concept and Digital Eclipse will make it. And as you can imagine, that was not a viable game design. So the team learned a lot by interpreting what does this player want to have happen and can we do that? And that was, but it's still available for free if you'd like to check it out. It was a very interesting project. Let's just leave it at that.
It was good. It was funny.
But last year we had 2 games that came out, the first of which was one that fans really responded well to, which was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Cowabunga collection. This was a collection of several arcade and 8-bit and 16-bit home games as well. Both the English and the Japanese versions, because there are differences between the games. You can swap between them with a button press. Chris, you really were the architect of sort of the structure of this, and you were there early on this project.
Yeah.
Stop me from talking.
No, I mean, the Cowabunga collection, I mean, the great thing is, and you never really know going into some of these projects, what the developer or the publisher of the classic games has retained as far as behind the scenes information and stuff like that. And we actually kind of everybody went in with the idea that there wasn't gonna be anything. And so like that's actually why in the game you see, we had galleries of comic book covers because we knew we could get that. We had galleries of screenshots from the TV show, which we thought these things were really cool, but like we knew we'd be able to get them, so it's like, oh, okay, well, this is sort of our backup just in case, Konami goes and looks and doesn't really have anything from making of the games. And it turns out that Konami really did a tremendous job archiving all of their old design documents and things like that, and we ended up with literally thousands of scanned pages of design documents from Ninja Turtles 1 on the NES and Manhattan Project and the whole full design document that sort of takes you through like how they converted the arcade Turtles in time into the SNES version, gives you a lot of insight into what they were thinking when they did that, and it was all of it came in, and it was all written in some designers' absolute like chicken scratch handwriting, Japanese, little tiny characters everywhere. And we were like, and Konami, thankfully, Konami agreed that we wanted to move forward with this, but we came up with a way to translate all of that and then float the text over the documents. And so you can turn that layer on and off. We translated it in many different languages, and so you can spend hours just diving into this. And, for me, I loved these games as a kid. So, to get to be the first person, one of the best days at work was like getting a zip file from Konami that was like, 35, gigs or whatever the hell it was, of just stuff, and just like navigating to a random folder and opening it and just like seeing a designer's sketch of a character from, Tournament Fighters or whatever. And so we did a lot of work, going through and categorizing it and, working all that out. And so the Turtles Lair and Cowabunga collection is something that I'm, really proud of.
And this is really a staple of what we try to do at Digital Eclipse. There's always additional context. Context is my favorite word working here, because even with the Mega Man collection and Street Fighter 30th and SNK, there's all these archival stories. And Frank Cifaldi was really, from the Video Game History Foundation, was a Digital Eclipse employee at the time, really helped sort of push towards that. Anybody can find a ROM, right? Like, why would you play our version? Maybe it's remastered, maybe there's quality of life improvements. Like in Turtles, we do have some cheat codes basically you can turn on and off at the menu of each game. That's great for players, but also what's the context? And so every project that we've done has gotten a little deeper into it. Mega Man actually had some sketches of characters that were cut, but we didn't really know much more other than this character was cut. We didn't know why. So as we've gone through and done more and more projects, we've been able to get more and more insight from the people that can actually answer this question.
One of the big things about this was it answered this fan question, and because people were like, in Tournament Fighters, it seems like the character Asuka, who was the female fighter in Tournament Fighters and SNES, is like, it seems like this was supposed to be originally like based on one of the characters in the Ninja Turtles 3 movie where they like go back in time, samurai days, and then it turns out, like looking at the design documents, that it absolutely was, because that character you could see was originally named with the original character name, and then it sort of changed as things went on. So like to be able to answer those questions, to like give people that ability. And the thing is, the other major part of this was Konami was like, okay, here's thousands of pages, like which ones are we going to include? And we were just like, everything, every single page.
Yes.
Because this is the time. The stars have aligned. We have the Turtles license, we have Konami, we have us. Like, we have the ability to take these literal pieces of paper that have been sitting in Japan where they could have like been lost in a fire. There had been a Konami fire. Like the Castlevania box art painting, like got burned in a fire, and if it's not a fire, it's a tsunami or an earthquake or a volcanic eruption. And it's just like, bad things could happen. Let's take this opportunity to get these things scanned and like available for everybody to look at. And it's like, I would never have wanted to leave even a scrap of paper behind, because like this was the golden moment to be able to do it.
Now, Justin, in addition to what you do for us, you've also been, what's the word for Atari? An advisor, right?
Yeah, consultant as well, but I am still advisor for Atari.
Okay.
This is one of the first projects I got involved with Digital Eclipse. I'd been involved with the studio for about 10 years, but in various roles. But by the way, if it's not obvious, like I'm the person without the journalist background that's on the panel. So, and as far as the company goes, like the studio, that's pretty true. We have a lot of ex-journalists. So
We employ, more ex-journalists and media types than we probably should, frankly. But yeah, I think we've got at least 5 or 6 people that have media experience that are working in
It's like a retirement home for aging video game journalists. Yeah.
We go for walks every day at 3 o'clock, we do. But yeah, go ahead, Justin.
yeah, so as far as Atari 50th goes, I mean, there's been plenty of Atari collections. And so one of the things we wanted to do was, what's something people haven't seen? And not just like tap into the nostalgia of like, hey, these are great old games. We remember them. Let's jump in for 5 minutes and then move on to the next thing. We have our editorial team here, both Chris and Dan. And the idea was, can we contextualize it so that it's more interesting than just having a collection of games like you did before, but also you contextualize it for like a whole new generation of gamer that can look at it and see why these games are so important.
Yeah, the idea behind it was like, okay, when playing things like like previous, like a collection, where it's you go in and it's like, here's a list of games, pick one and start playing it. And I find that I'll kind of pick a game and try it and be like, okay, maybe this is not my thing, and jump back out and like maybe I'll pick another game and kind of do that and maybe end up like just kind of sampling little bits of games for an hour. And if I didn't find something that really grabbed me, I feel like, well, maybe this isn't the product, for me. And so it's like, how can we, and that's sort of anecdote, and some of the data that I've heard as well is that, like, when people have access to this sort of all-you-can-eat library of classic games, they'll play things for just a little bit. And so I'm like, well, how do you harness that? And it's like, well, if we do this like an interactive museum, if you do this where you're walking through the history of Atari, and those games are exhibits that are placed along, and placed alongside the design documents and the video features and things like that, and if the games are given equal weight and are exhibits in the collection and are laid out chronologically and are contextualized, then as I'm going through, first of all, I'm not starting in the A's on the list and it's like Asteroids, Astroblast, Astro Smash, Astro Grover, it's like which one do I put? And instead of that, it's here's Pong. And before Pong, here's a picture. We don't have computer space in Atari 50, but it's like, here's a picture of computer space, and then here's Pong. Jump in, you play Pong. There's no AI, so if you're playing alone, you're literally just hitting the paddle and the other one's not moving because it's a two-player game only. But when you play it, it's like, okay, right, I've familiarized myself with how this works. And then it's okay to stop. And when you stop, you're not just booted back out to the title screen, you're still on the historical journey that you're going on. So all those little bits and pieces of gameplay here and there, they all actually add up to something meaningful, especially when you move on to like Breakout and you see, oh, okay, this is Pong and it's turned this way. And then you see Space Invaders, oh, this is Breakout, but the blocks are a little alien, and it all adds up to something like more meaningful in the end. And that was the idea behind it, and it seems to have worked. I mean, that's kind of how people are enjoying Atari 50, and they're taking something away from it.
Yeah, it was actually interesting to see the reaction because so many people had done collections before, and we intentionally called this the anniversary celebration because we were telling a narrative story. We wanted to give context to the games and encourage people. We had internal discussions. When you boot up the program, where do you plop the player? Like, where do you put them? And we decided we needed to put them on the timeline to encourage them to walk through the museum. You can hit one button and go to all 100+ games at any point and browse it like it's any other collection. And we knew a lot of people wanted to do that. But it seemed to actually confuse people. Like, we've had to explain, and it was very hard for the first few months. Like, well, it's not, why isn't this doing what the previous Atari, 10 compilations that I've bought have done? Because that's been done, and we really wanted to do it a different way. It was amazing. We got to interview, we've got like an hour's worth of original video in there with the people that lived Atari history. We're thankful that so many of them are still here and answered our calls. So, hearing Al Alcorn tell the story, the famous story of how Pong was on test and it broke down and he had to go do it, well, everyone in the industry knows that story. So we literally asked everybody that we interviewed to tell us their version of that story, and then used Al as the through line to find out what was actually true. But different people that we interviewed, Eugene Jarvis has a history at Atari Pinball that a lot of people didn't even know, and he's an extremely vulgar human being. So his retelling was wonderful to cut away to, things like that. So this was really a proof of concept. Can we offer something that is linear and narrative and makes sense in that way, and hopefully, as Chris said, very much like walking through a museum exhibit, except they let you touch everything and you understand why everything is behind glass, and some of it's not behind glass.
And we really believe, so even internally at work, like we try not to say the word collection. We try not to say the word retro. We certainly never try to say retro collection, because what we call Atari 50 and some of the stuff that's going to come out later is an interactive documentary. It is like watching, and I don't know, maybe you've all had this experience too. Like, you watch a Netflix documentary about the history of video games, and they start talking about whatever, Space Invaders, and you start thinking to yourself, I'd like to, wish I could just pause this documentary right now and play some Space Invaders to get a sense of what they're talking about, and then kind of go back to it. It makes you want to play the games. Well, in the medium of the video game, we can do this multimedia presentation where we can have the videos, you can take it at your own pace, and then the games can be integrated and playable in that. And that's what makes us think it's we kind of started off Digital Eclipse by saying, we want to treat classic games with more respect. That is certainly a key, tenet. And the new one now that we're kind of discovering is our belief that the medium of the video game is the best medium in which to tell stories of video game history. And in fact, it's a way to do it that nobody else can do. And this is actually very similar to stuff that happened with film, because for a while in the 60s, 70s, film critics were just writing about films, And then eventually somebody was like, what if we start doing movies about movies? Because then you can show the movie in the movie when you're talking about the movie, And so it's similar in that respect. We hope that other people are going to start doing it as well, because just as fans and people who love these stories, like we can't do everything, but we're going to try to do as many as we can.
Yeah, in the meantime, please give all of your money to us so that we can be the leader in this. But Atari 50 led directly to decisions that were made on the making of Karateka, or Karateka, or Karateka, or Karateka, however you want to say it. That's actually part of this project, is how do you say the name. But most of us, for whatever reason, say Karateka, so I'm probably just going to fall into that. And this was actually, we liked the idea of the interactive documentary, and we thought, can we come up with a cool name for what an interactive documentary is? We cannot. So we're stuck with interactive documentary. We honestly couldn't come up with a better or more descriptive phrase as to what that kind of experience is. But the making of Karateka was in development for about 4 years.
Longer.
I believe, this was early on, and it didn't reach its final form until we had done Atari 50, tried that interactive linear timeline, and being able to jump between timelines and jump between games. Jordan Mechner saved everything. So he's a fantastic resource where we knew we had access, we were working directly with him, and he owned all the rights to Karateka. So that made this, very juicy. You can tell a really awesome story, specifically about the origin of this game, what it was like for him as a college student at Yale to suddenly be the first person to really put cinematic images, and cinematic techniques into an Apple II game. The first video game to use rotoscoping for its animation. The first Apple II game with symphonic-style music and leitmotifs. There were so many important firsts, and yet so many games sort of think about video game history. Gamers think about it as, 1983 was the crash, and 1985 was the NES, and nothing happened in between, And this is what happened, and this was such an important story. Chris, you were involved in this very early, and I don't know if you want to say anything, Justin. You're sort of leaning forward, so I don't want to cut you off.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, I'm just interested in what you're saying. So
Thank you.
No, the one thing I would say is, having watched this myself, more of a consumer view that I had when I first got to see it, was just, I got to watch a lot of the videos of Jordan's dad. And I came away with it, this guy should have won, Dad of the Year. Because, his support of his son and how he kind of set him on this trajectory is just phenomenal. So. Yeah,
Chris, you actually had dinner with them.
I did. So
and you've gotten to meet both of them in person.
Yeah. So in April, Jordan lives in France, but he was like, I'm going to be visiting, visiting my father in New York, and I'm like, great, I will come out, I will meet you guys, and show you this, and and his father, who's now 93 years old, is kind of like a celebrity to me now, because I had spent the last 3 years just living in Karateka land on and off, basically just doing the deep research and writing this stuff, and they were very nice, and they were really, they were very, they were wonderful to share their stories with us, but they really, especially Jordan's dad, just really was, blown away by having this story, told in this way. But yeah, they're really great. They're amazing characters. Jordan Mechner was the creator of Prince of Persia, right? So he did Karateka and then moved on to Prince of Persia, and he's very, very well-respected game developer, one of the sort of legendary developers in the medium. And to watch the video of him sitting next to his dad, with his dad kind of needling him about stuff he did when he was 12, you know what I mean? Really, it's very funny, it's very disarming, it really humanizes the whole story, and that's really, we're very lucky to be able to tell this one story of this making of one game all the way through in the way that we did, because it really puts that human face on things. And if you've never heard of Karateka, and the important thing to talk about with Karateka and Atari 50 as well, it's if you weren't an Atari person growing up, if you've never played any of these games, if you've never heard of Karateka, never played Karateka, you are who we're targeting, like with the interactive documentaries, because we are starting from the presumption that you have never heard of these games, never played these games, and we're gonna walk you through the history, tell you not just, like, not just the what, like a retro collection is the what, right? This is the who and the where and the when and the why. It's the what platform, what hardware did they use to make it? How did that hardware shape it? When was this made? What tools were available to them? And finally, like, why? Like, what was the motivating force that caused this game to come into existence? And you, know about all those things when you understand where that video game came from. Only then do we say, oh, okay, here's the video game. And then when you play it, it's not just, you didn't just pick a random game off a list. Hopefully you're emotionally invested.
Right.
In the case of Karateka, we've already sold a few copies of Karateka to educators, right? And that's one of the reasons why we have things, some of the features that we have in these we have watch mode. So you could put this in front of somebody and say, hey, you literally don't even need to play any video games to get everything out of this, because you can jump into the watch and play mode for Karateka, and you can watch a playthrough of it, and you can use chapter select to jump to certain times in the game to watch it happen. I think that's really important too. Especially as games get longer and more complicated, to be able to talk about in the documentary portion, like, here's this important scene that came together, and then just let you jump to that scene is kind of vital to this whole thing.
There was also a challenge with this one because, with Atari 50, we had more than 100 games. 6 of those were exclusive to that collection and built by our team. We had just recently sort of cleaned our claws remaking like Haunted House. There's a new version of Haunted House called Haunted Houses that uses 3D voxel technology, so it looks like you're playing like a Minecraft version of a new version of Haunted House. So we were able to reinterpret a few things. Karateka is one game, but it's not. There's 14 playables throughout this thing because we have Jordan's original prototype, then the first prototype that he submitted to Broderbund with their changes, and the second prototype. Turns out he also had a completely different Asteroids-inspired game called Death Bounce that never came out. He had a publishing deal. He worked back and forth. They kept asking for changes. He got frustrated and it never came out. So not only do we have all of the Karateka prototypes, we have every prototype that was playable of Death Bounce, and then our team was able to go in and do a remastered, fresh port of Karateka. Mike Micah wanted to put it on the Amiga when he was a younger man, and he failed at that port. And he was always frustrated with some of the inaccurate ports that showed up later in Karateka. So he said, this is my white whale. I'm going to go back and I'm going to port it over. And he created a new sort of almost a PC VGA, if that was his target. And then he took the code line by line and went through, and he said, it's the only way you can understand it. So you can play his remastered version, but that also comes with commentary of Mike telling you what he's doing as you play through that you can toggle on and off whenever you want. And just for the cherry on top, our engineers also took Death Bounce and said, well, what if Death Bounce was being remade today? So we have a remake of a game that never came out, and people love it. So we were able to put 14 playables, even though it's one game. So there's plenty to do, and there's plenty of those opportunities that Rich was talking about. You go through the linear narrative and go, I want to know more about what's this like to play? And you can play and see okay, these are the changes that Broderbund asked of Jordan, and this is that version. And you can see what's there and what's not there from what you remember when you played before. So being able to do that, even though it was a limited scope, it turned out to be an extremely rich project with a lot to do and a lot to see. Now it's finally Justin's time to talk, because when you get into Justin's true love, it's RPGs and Apple II, and you cannot have that conversation without the big daddy of Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. Wizardry, this particular title is the first game in the Wizardry saga. Came out in 1981. It has been commercially unavailable for 20 years, and it is now available in early access on Steam and GOG, and it's fully playable while we add additional animations and art and audio and music assets to it. But this is really one of your passion projects, and you have spent so much time of the last 2 years getting everybody who has a different part of the Wizardry legacy legally to come together and let us be able to do this and bring this back out, this very important game, to and make it more accessible to the current generation.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of inside baseball, but it started probably even before that, where I used to work as the CEO of Double Fine. Are people familiar with Double Fine? Yeah. Okay, sweet, thank you. So previous to this, one of the games I was able to bring back was Grim Fandango. And if everybody remembers, it was announced at E3 at Sony's press conference, and I remember it vividly for a reason you'll find out just in a second, but basically there was a letter written by a little girl, and read through it, and it was like requesting that Grim Fandango be brought back because it was also commercially unavailable. Well, doing the VO for that was actually my daughter. So I had a really awesome moment for that. And I even tell her now, I'm like, your first VO was in front of over 2 million people. And so that was a fun moment. But that game when it was released actually outsold the original when we brought it back. And watching people get their hands on it again. Like we were showing the first demo and people would walk up and they'd spend they'd pick up the controller and spend 30 seconds and then all of a sudden put it down. I'm like, oh crap, it's maybe not, relevant anymore. And then what people would say is they're like, I want to be at home. I want to have this experience at home. It's like, I can't do this right here. And so what that showed me was like these games, and we had this discussion internally. We call them retro games, we call them old games, we call them legacy games. We kind of came up with iconic, right? Because a lot of these games actually formed our experiences that have then inspired game developers who created these current mass hits. So from Double Fine, I went on and started a company called Fig. We did basically project financing, like film financing for games is what it ended up being. And it had a crowdfunding component. And I met Brian Fargo. So he had done a crowdfunding for Bard's Tale. And he actually, part of that, he did a remaster and brought it back. And my same daughter was sitting down and playing the remaster of that. And she's like, there's no game like this. She's like, this is so cool. It's like, I was watching her try to go to the equipment shop to outfit her first character, and she died. And she was like, I was like, uh-oh, this is where the rage quit comes in. And she loved it. She just kept on going back and making new characters and stuff. And I was like, well, that's phenomenal. So I had talked to Brian, and I was like, Brian, Wizardry is something, it's been commercially unavailable, and I think people would love to get their hands on it. It was like the first CRPG. And so he actually introduced me to Surtex, and then I actually ended up getting in touch with Robert Woodhead, and then I'd been working with Digital Eclipse, and so I talked to the team at Digital Eclipse, and there's unbeknownst to me, there's this group that was very much into RPGs, and they love Wizardry. And then I walked in one day, and our head programmer Ian, he has a 3D printed version of the first level, just laid out. I mean, it's very big. And I was like, wow, I found the right people for this. So the rights and stuff, they were pretty tangled. Getting all the rights in place, it was basically 3 hours before the game launched, is when we were able to get everything to come together.
We have an alternate logo that we've never shown anybody that just says Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, because we weren't sure if we were going to be able to call it Wizardry, even though we knew all of you would call it Wizardry. And I think that ultimately became part of the conversation, guys, it's going to be what it is. You might as well get credit for it,
Yeah, totally. So we had that. It's actually in the code. If people, if you want to, well, anyway.
No, don't.
You can
Don't hack the
flip it
game.
on.
Don't encourage them. They will do cheat codes.
Well, but it is a game that encouraged modding when you.
That's true.
Keeping that in mind, maybe we'll see. But so this game, the team built it from the ground up. It's original Pascal. They moved it over to Unreal. So when you're playing this game, you're playing the exact original game from 1981. It has the exact monsters, the tables, the random encounters you draw. Everything is the same except for you have this. We're trying, and this is something we do at Digital Eclipse. We try to make it the video you remember in your head, rather than the exact visuals. So our art director, he took that and he was looking at fantasy book covers from the 80s and 90s, and he was like, hey, let's use this as our inspiration. And so we hope we've accomplished that. It's playable at our booth, so if you haven't seen it, I'd love for you to stop by and have your take on what we've done.
This is also our first early access game. It's only been out for about 5 weeks. We've got a major update coming in about 3, which will address some bugs, add some features. There's a whole, I'm calling it the Wizardry Pokedex, but it's the bestiary. So as you encounter monsters, you will start collecting information on them, and the descriptions will actually help you play, help you strategize when you meet them again. And again, that's something we don't want to, it's not a remake, we're calling it a remake. But when we asked the engineer, Ian's like, well, technically it's a port, because I took Pascal and I made it work in Unreal.
I don't like the port because ports cost less, and I like
Right,
remakes. So
right.
get more money.
But it really comes out to a remastering of the original code, but in a form you wouldn't necessarily expect. So I'm happy to say that the community has been overwhelmingly positive about this, offering suggestions, offering us bug fixes. But some of the feedback that I got, I did not expect. One of the things that was a benefit of being able to run the original code when you're playing in Unreal is that you can still see the Apple II interface in the corner at all times if you want, or overlaid as a primary at all times, or you can turn it off. Again, it's just options for how people would want to experience this, or be reminded if they're an old school gamer, they want to, but I miss. The strangest feedback that we did not expect. We spent 2 years doing all these 3D assets, and what do they want? Can you turn off the 3D stuff? I just want to see the Apple II interface. And I was like, let me go back to the team. I'm like, hey, could you guys just, is there like a turn off all the hard work that you did button? But we're having that conversation internally because the engineers are like, well, it wouldn't be that hard. I mean, it's kind of a shame, but if that's how people want to enjoy it, who are we to say? So, those are the kind of things that we can evolve based on what the audience tells us is important to them. But we would not have expected that because we're like, look, we've got controller support and we've got, 3D, beautiful animations, all 101 monsters and creeping coins. They look amazing now. And everybody's like, if I could just have the, 80 columns or 40 columns, that'd be great on the Apple II. So we're learning as we go. Quite honestly, the roadmap for this is not too long, where the game is fully playable. Some of my favorite feedback so far has been, I bought the game and I played all the way through and I beat Wordna and my party wiped 15 times. I had a hell of a great weekend. That's very Wizardry. It's just as punishing as it ever was, but the look on people's face when they say, so can I play the original? I'm like, you are playing the original. It's kind of amazing. So the Wizardry is not part of the Gold Master series yet, but we would love to be able to tell that same sort of interactive documentary story about Wizardry. It has a fascinating history, but because that title is in early access, we're still trying to figure out whether we're going to be able to do it. But the Gold Master series started with making of Karateka. We do have part 2, the second volume of this ongoing series, and I do love that we're pointing to the fences by making it a 3-digit number. The series is, is 001 and 002.
Absolutely. 1,000 seem like a lot.
Yeah, come on. We're not greedy. But we will be announcing today. No, we'll be announcing before the end of the year. 002 will be publicly known before the end of the year. Very excited about that. So we have probably...
There's something on the show floor that I was like, that
really?
you know of.
Oh, yeah.
That I told you about, where I was just like, I saw it and I'm like,
that's
nothing.
Yeah.
We're not doing anything.
Yeah, so we only have about 5 or 6 minutes left, and I want to respect our time, but we do have time for questions. I do want to say, are you guys going to do my favorite game is not a question we can answer.
Right, yeah.
We do take suggestions seriously, and we do actually keep a list of what people have been asking for on social media and in forums. I keep that list. Every obscure game you can think of has been suggested, and many of them match things that we have already developed internally and that we've pitched publishers and said we'd like to do this. Obviously, licensing and getting everybody on the same page, the way that Konami was very well aligned with us and the way that Jordan was very well aligned with us, that takes a lot of time and effort and money. But we are always out there pitching. We've probably got about 5 games in active development.
Yeah, it's fun to look at this because we look at our list of prospective projects we're going through, and basically, if you've mentioned it, it's likely on the list.
Yeah.
It's like 95% chance on the list. And sometimes people are coming up to us and they're like, we're about to announce it in like 6 to 8 weeks, and they've already guessed what it is. And we're like, cool, well, we got a surprise for you.
Right. Okay, yeah, I have a question over there on the right. You, sir, on the far right with the glasses.
Yeah. Is everyone who originally developed Wizardry still alive? And what are some of the complexities involved in licensing?
So the question is everyone who originally built Wizardry still alive, and what are some of the complexities involved in licensing?
And the answer is yes, they are. So Wizardry 1, Proving Grounds Mad Overlord, is Robert Woodhead and Andrew Greenberg, and the Serotex were the first publishers of that. They were actually testers on the project, and they actually helped finance it and got the original, box art together. And it is one of the first ones that, transitioned from being like sold in Ziploc bags to having a proper display case, which is interesting. One other real quick thing I want to note is if you do play Wizardry, we've done some quality of life improvements, but we also made the options to turn all those off. If you want it to be just as hard and as punishing as it was before, you can have that experience. So, yes.
So while Wizardry isn't part of the Gold Master series, are there going to be any archival materials involved with the game, like advertisements, box art, documentation from?
We'd like to do that. We have a pretty ambitious plan that I cannot talk about, other than to say that we have a pretty ambitious plan on how we would want to tell that story through this specific product. One of my jobs as the content editor, I work on, Chris is my boss, so I basically, when things need to be scanned in, I help scan them in. I am currently scanning in an original Apple II manual that we took apart so we could get really clean things. So that's one of the things we want to add is the original manual, which has wonderful illustrations. If you've never seen it, it's got hand-drawn cartoons and stuff. It's really great. But being able to do that whole museum approach and being able to do the kind of linear timelines and things, that's a stretch goal for us internally. We're not, that's the best way to put it. Yeah, we have a plan. Yeah, I think it would be super awesome. No, I don't know if we can afford to do it. And to be completely honest, that's the answer. So yeah, we want to do archive stuff. We want to put bonus materials in at the very least. But if we can go all the way and tell, the narrative of the making of Wizardry, especially since we would be able to, ask Robert Woodhead. We've already actually gotten some interviews with Robert Woodhead that we have in the can to start building around, those interviews to be able to tell the story. So. Maybe, hopefully, but yeah, at this point, being in early access, we're just not sure. The focus is to finish the PC version, and then what else can we add to it, and where else can we take it? Do we do a console version? Do we do other versions? Do we do sequels? All of those questions are to be determined, but once we get the Windows version done, then we can look and say, okay, did we make enough, on that to be able to extend the project? So we're open to extending the project. Yes, in the plat.
Sort of to piggyback off that, because it was most of my question as well. Would the team, or is the team already, exploring also the international Wizardry scene? Because I know that the game was huge in Japan.
So is Chris Kohler.
Yeah, I know. That's true. Yes, as somebody who was also famous in Japan, I was banging the drum on this, hey, Wizardry, it's really popular in Japan. And in fact, Justin, we have seen tremendous sales in Japan, right? Even if it's still the game it's not even done. It's entirely in English, but
yeah, we were very surprised because we released it and it's the store description wasn't even localized in Japanese. It's this game we released. It's all in English, and it was 1-for-1 sales for a little bit of time there, and we're
Yep.
oh wow, well we should translate this game to maybe look at translating it to Japanese.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good idea.
Right. Which we had. It's we knew that we wanted to do that, but then the sort of the sales already in Japan are okay. Then we kind of fast tracked Japanese translation
priority moved way up.
Yes, priority moved way up. Absolutely, yes.
And then in talking about the franchise's history and the franchise's impact, then yes, that would also be reflected. You've mentioned Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. I think they both are very heavily influenced by Wizardry.
Yeah, Yuji Horii, who created Dragon Quest, and Hironobu Sakaguchi, who created Final Fantasy, they both specifically said we were inspired by Wizardry. So they should tweet about this as well.
Yeah, they really should. But yes, we would want to tell the larger international story of Wizardry as much as we can within the context of the first game.
Yeah. Demon Souls as well. So if you look at the actual loop for Demon Souls, it's very much almost an upgraded Wizardry. One of the mechanics from that game, which I thought was very interesting, is if you die in that game, right, you can go back and basically get all the experience that you had from your character. That actually came from Wizardry. You can do that. If you die in Wizardry, you can take a new party and actually go down in the maze and find your dead
Corpses.
Yeah.
We literally have time for one more question, and it's yours, ma'am.
Hi. So you guys mentioned you have a number of projects projects in the pipeline or whatnot. How do you kind of select and prioritize like what you ultimately choose to do? Like, is it viability? Is it interest, demand?
Viability is
Just
a good word.
Just get it on the mic. Basically, how do we select what projects we want to do? What are the criteria, viability, demand, et cetera?
Well, I'll turn it over to Justin really, but it's a mix of sometimes we have opportunities, sometimes we go to people with them, and sometimes they come to us. So we still do some sort of work for hire stuff. We also work with other indie teams. So a lot of it is about permissions and timing. You know, like, hey, this seems like a good time to do an anniversary thing. But it really is super fluid. I think that's probably the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, I think one phrase that kind of comes up when we evaluate these is like the threshold of materiality. And so we just need to know, like, all old games aren't iconic. So that word iconic is something that we really key into. No one likes to hear this in the studio, but I also am like the money person, like the business person. So it has to be commercially viable. So we have that as a piece as well. But in that, it then becomes like, okay, so we then have a list of like every IP that we think we can get a hold of, even the ones we can't. So, and then we go and we try to pursue the ones that seem most likely, and then we kind of do a Venn diagram between them, and that's really where we're operating from.
And then Limited Run Games announces that they got it, and we're like, okay.
Right. Yeah, that one goes off the list.
I mean, really, what we want to do here is, I'd love to get to the point. Here's the challenge right now, right? We bring out Atari 50, and we've created it for people who don't know Atari, and we've created a story that you would watch. I mean, again, like, you know, if you see a Netflix documentary about something that seems interesting, you don't have to already be bought into that to want to watch the documentary and learn about it, right? Like, you can watch, you know, Hell's Kitchen or whatever, even if you're not in the restaurant industry, right? But like, not that I would call it a documentary, but but you get what I'm saying. Well, with Atari, with Atari 50, I got a lot of like responses from my friends and stuff like that, like, oh, well, I didn't get that one. I'm not really into Atari. And sometimes you hear, people with the making of Karateka, oh, well, I didn't play that game back in the day. And so the challenge for us is to kind of get over that hump of people thinking that this product is not for them if they are not already previously bought into that particular brand or game or franchise. So hopefully what we can do is because ultimately it's about, even if, what I'd love to get to the point, I mean, I'm sure Justin would agree that yes, theoretically this sounds great, if we could get to the point where the game itself is unknown and would not be by itself commercially viable as a retro collection, but if there's a really good story, if there's a really interesting story that we can tell you about something you've never heard of, that we could potentially bring that to life as a game and know that people are going to buy it not based off the name recognition of the game itself, or even if the game itself is good, bad, whatever, but that we are promising to take you on a journey that is kind of outside of the game itself. And so ultimately, that's where I'd love to be, years down the line. And if we can continue to do the Gold Master Series and show people that it's not about, the intrinsic quality or recognition of the game, but about the story that we're telling, then we can potentially get to a good place with that. And it's risky, and it's not necessarily, maybe we can't overcome this challenge, but like, we are going to try. Like, it's a business plan, but we all really believe in the cause that we really want to do it. So we're gonna give it our best.
Yeah. We do have a booth over in Hall E, the arcade. We have Karateka and Wizardry playable, so please do swing by. If you haven't been by before the end of the show, we'll be here till 5. Frank Cifaldi is up next, and there he is. Meow. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and to the right are a few more videos from the Portland Retro Gaming Expo 2023. Thanks for watching.